The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Pat, have you heard of the weed killer spray called Roundup? Is that something you've heard of? You have.
I've seen that commercials.
So regulators in California took a step towards becoming the first state to require Roundup weed killer to come with a warning label saying that it is known to cause cancer. It's been announced that starting on July 7th, the weed killer's main ingredient, glyphosate, will appear on a list that California keeps of potentially cancerous chemicals. And a year later, the listing could come with warning labels on the product, according to officials. But it's not certain whether Roundup will ultimately get a warning label. The chemical is made by Monsanto. They have filed an appeal after losing in court to block the labeling, arguing Roundup doesn't cause cancer and the labels will harm our business. I have some very specific thoughts on this. I believe the science on glyphosate. I believe that there should be a warning on it. I believe that the science shows that it is carcinogenic. Mm-hmm. The problem is California has these laws where there are so many things that have to be labeled as potentially cancer-causing that many people in California now ignore that label. I actually ordered recently, I think I told the story in relation to a live call we got. I recently ordered some pencils, like a kit of pencils with 2 erasers from Amazon. And apparently because it was labeled for 50-state sale, it had something like under Part 50 or article, I don't remember what it was called, but it basically said, we have to disclose for the sale in the state of California that this is potentially cancer-causing. And I said, wait a second, pencils? How are pencils cancer-causing? I looked it up, and it turns out that sawdust, if inhaled, wood sawdust can be carcinogenic. So presumably, if you were to grind up the pencils, or I guess when you sharpen the pencils, if you were to snort the pencil shavings, it would be potentially carcinogenic. Because so many products are now labeled in that way, I know many people in California who just ignore that. And my concern is once you add that same warning to glyphosate, people will ignore it.
Yeah, and even in just common conversation, people have this hysteria to think that everything causes cancer, down to, plastic water bottles and microwaves. So it does definitely muddy the water, and people will just write this off as one and the same with everything else.
And it's not untrue that snorting sawdust, I'm not denying that snorting sawdust can be carcinogenic, but my point is that when so many products are packaged with that, particularly when it's not even clear, like I thought to myself, well, is it the pencil graphite that's the problem, or like what is the problem? And then when I Googled it, people were saying, sawdust, inhaled sawdust is what it is. But if you're using pencils in a sort of normal way, you don't have to worry about that.
Well, with this chemical, it seems pretty settled that it can cause cancer, but we don't really know what amount it would take to cause cancer.
Fair enough.
And if that amount is present in Roundup. So that's why I think you see some hesitation from the California State Board.
Do we not know what the not deadly dose is, but very often we sort of have a sense that...
They seem to say that it's up in the air, that we're not sure at this point.
Also remember that just because we can't agree on the specific dose doesn't mean that the specific dose could be really high. It could be disagreements over different but similarly low doses.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Like I said, I watched the Roundup commercials.
Yep.
And in the commercials, they always have people spraying their sidewalks because, of course, weeds can grow in the crevices.
Yes.
And so just about, it's not like you're just spraying it in your backyard or something where it really only affects you and your family.
No doubt.
Just anyone walking by can be affected by this.
I believe that recently the mayor of Northampton, Massachusetts, the great David Narkowitz, who joined us on the show not that long ago to talk about how the Trump sanctuary city order would affect the city of Northampton, Massachusetts, if at all, he recently made some declaration that Northampton Public Works, I think, will no longer use Roundup. Like they've made a decision that they are just not going to use it anymore to deal with weeds or something like that.
Yeah, if that was going to happen, I think it would have to start in Northampton.
Northampton or what? Somerville?
Yeah. Or Cambridge.
Or Cambridge,
any
maybe.
of these poshy, uppity, yuppie type Massachusetts towns.
Okay, let's talk about Martin Shkreli. Remember Martin Shkreli? He's the guy who raised the cost of a life-saving drug by 5,000%, widely hated. His defense was, listen, we are changing the book price of it, but very few people actually use this drug. We are going to make sure that none of I don't remember if it was 1,200 or 2,000 people who use this drug. We're going to make sure that nobody is unable to get the drug if they can't afford it. But still, when you raise a drug 5,000% in terms of its price, people don't like you. There is now a problem. They need to put together a jury for his trial. And many jurors are saying, I am not able to be impartial because I'm coming in here with such a negative view about this guy. Now, the trial doesn't have to do with the price increase of that drug. This is a federal securities fraud trial for, I don't remember the exact details, but at one point he was basically using company funds as like a personal slush fund. And it has to do with misappropriation of investor money, some kind of fraud. It has nothing to do with the $5,000 price increase. And yet, many potential jurors were excused because they said, I can't be impartial. This guy, I just hate this guy. He's an evil guy. I'm sorry. And they were dismissed by the judge.
Martin Shkreli has had ample time to speak his case as to why he raised the price of Daraprim, going on interviews. He even testified to Congress on it. But I think he's already been convicted in the court of public opinion on that. So people are obviously going to go into that court case with a negative view of him.
Some of the quotes are hilarious. One juror reportedly explained that he couldn't possibly be impartial towards Martin Shkreli because he is, quote, the face of corporate greed. Another juror said they couldn't be impartial because Martin Shkreli is, quote, the most hated man in America. And a third juror chose to gesture instead of speak why he couldn't be impartial and made the wringing of the neck hand gesture.
Oh, but David, he was going to use that money for more research and development to find an alternative to Daraprim. So
how's that going?
Yeah. He's working on it. You know, it may take some time, but these legal troubles aren't going to help him.
It's going about as well as the search, as O.J. Simpson's search for the real killer of Nicole Brown Simpson. It's going about that well. Okay, so this is going to be a tough thing. And there was one point, sort of around the time of Martin Shkreli's arrest and eventual indictment, where he would do Facebook streams. Like he would just start streaming on Facebook Live or sometimes on YouTube. He'd just be sitting at his computer. And sometimes he'd be playing like computer chess. Sometimes he would just be browsing Twitter and he would do like a screen share. And it would go on for hours. It was really a weird thing that he was doing. Just a strange guy.
I've seen some bizarre interviews too. You know, we obviously have a right here to a trial of a jury of your peers.
Sure.
But the problem is, I think, you know, just the average group in our society is going to be against him.
Yeah.
It's also similar to finding people to serve on juries for death penalty cases.
Right.
Because in order to serve on those juries, you have to be open to ruling in favor of the death penalty for any given case.
But yet not having made any kind of having any preconceived notion about the particular case that you're involved in, which is why jury selection can be tough for death penalty.
And for a national story like this, too, it's hard to not have any preconceived notions.
I read a fascinating article about a young woman who went on a Tinder date with Martin Shkreli. And it's a really funny article. And she talks about how they went to some place where they had like a really big tea selection and they had like a $200 tea that you could order. It was like $200 for a pot of this tea. And I guess Martin Shkreli got it and they shared it. And it sounds bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen an interview with him where the reporter plays chess with Martin Shkreli. Obviously, this is just some person off the street. They don't really know chess, you'd imagine. And he just is so incredibly condescending, and it's characteristics that you wouldn't think are uncommon among someone who would do this sort of thing, the face of corporate greed out there.
So in other words, he was playing chess with the reporter, but he was like making fun of the moves the guy was making?
It's like, oh, wow, I'm surprised you're using that approach. She doesn't really know what she's doing.
Right. That is weird. Hey, Salvador Dali. Very weird story. A judge in Madrid has ordered that Salvador Dali's body, which has been interred for for almost 3 decades, be exhumed because a 61-year-old Spanish woman claims that she is the daughter of the renowned Spanish painter. She was born in 1956, named Maria Pilar Abel Martinez. She says that her mother Antonia had a secret affair with the famed painter while working as a maid for a neighboring family on the northeastern coast of Spain. Abel said that her mother told her several times that Dali was her father, and the judge ruled, listen, we have no personal objects or biological remains left to determine paternity, so we need to exhume the body and do a DNA test on the bones of Salvador Dali nearly 30 years after he was buried. How wacky is this?
Yeah, I don't really think it has to do with her wanting to get in touch more with her family tree. It probably has to do with, wanting rights to his estate and his property.
It's a financial thing, absolutely. And the state-run foundation, which manages Dali's estate, says that it's going to appeal the ruling almost immediately, and we'll see what ultimately comes of that. But what a bizarre story.
It is interesting, too, how Salvador Dali's masterpiece was The Persistence of Memory, that picture of the melting clocks, and it kind of shows you how all of time and space is relative.
Yes.
I guess, him seemingly coming back from the dead to be exhumed is in keeping with that piece.
I'm a fan of his work. I actually do really like his work, and I find it, the melting clocks thing is super interesting.
Very surreal.
He's got a lot of really good stuff. An eccentric, a serious eccentric. And what else can we say? I don't know that we can say much else.
I mean, I think just because he's a famous person and he's being exhumed is why we're talking about it. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, Pat reminding us that Salvador Dali was a famous person.
Yeah. It wasn't just any random person off the street being
We're not
exhumed.
talking about a random guy here. We are talking about the great Spanish painter. Okay, we are not going to be here on Monday, July 3rd or Tuesday, July 4th. This is going to be what I am calling the 4th of July vacation. So what were our options, right? Our options were to take the 3rd of July off in observance of the 4th of July, which is a federal holiday here in the United States, where 75% of our audience is, or just take, and then we would be working on the 4th of July, which doesn't really make sense because the building will strictly speaking be closed. And, it's a federal holiday. To take the 4th of July off, but to work on the 3rd of July, which would be kind of weird to just come in and do one show and then we're gone and then we're back on Wednesday. So what we decided was, because I adhere to this idea that in the United States, we don't take time off seriously enough, and that really other countries, particularly European countries, really have it right. They prioritize having more time off, but blah, 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 blah. I've done my spiel before. I said, we'll take the weekend off, and then we'll take the 3rd off, and then we'll take the 4th off, and then we'll be back on July 5th.
And what a better time to bring this approach to America than on our Independence Day, right?
Hard to disagree with that.
Yeah.
Hard to disagree with that. I don't know why, but I'm finding it very difficult to disagree with that. Okay, so the show hasn't been canceled. Please don't cancel your membership. We haven't gone away. I know every time we take a weekday off, there are people who will just cancel their memberships because they think we've canceled the show or are no longer committed to producing programs.
Like, even though it's obviously a holiday,
well,
maybe they're in another country.
Sometimes people will say, oh, why were you off on this day? And like Thanksgiving. And I'll say, well, it's a federal holiday here in the U.S. and people are with family and that type of thing.
Well, you don't take Bulgaria's Independence Day off. Why do you take America's Independence Day off?
Because we are in the United States. That is why.
Finding that hard to disagree with.
Just be glad I'm not taking Jewish holidays off, because there are a lot of them, and there would be endless missed days. So I think that's the silver lining here.
Yeah, I'm taking Palm Sunday off next year, just so you know.
You've got
my Catholic roots.
No problem, no problem. Okay, so anyway, we'll be back on July 5th. The show hasn't been canceled, don't worry, and we have deliberately not scheduled an interview for July 5th, so that we can at least have a little more time to get caught up on the long weekend.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan.
All right, we'll speak to you then. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.